Welcome back, you guys. This is your host, Andrea, with From Mrs. to Ms. I am so stoked right now to have these lovely women on this episode with me. You guys are just going to go nuts because I have not really dove into this yet and talked about sex. I mean, I've talked about sex, but not in the way we're about to talk about it today. So we're very excited. I have Dr. Willow Brown with me today, and I have Leah Piper. Hi, ladies. Thank you so much for coming on From Mrs. to Ms. I'm so excited to have you.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. Yeah, together we have this podcast ourselves called Sex Reimagined. So if y'all love today's podcast, then you can get a lot more of it on our podcast as well.
Yes, I love that. So Leah Piper and Dr. Willow Brown are the masterminds behind what Willow just mentioned, the Sex Reimagined podcast. It opens the mind and hearts of its listeners to the vast possibilities that exist within the realm of sexuality, spirituality, and relationships. So with a combined 40 years of professional experience in the sex and intimacy space, these two ambassadors of love are ready to support you on your journey with sacred sexuality and all that it encompasses. So I'm really, really excited because we're just going to go wherever this takes us today. We're going to follow a flow. And if we're just going on and on, we're just going to do it, right? That's our plan.
That's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about sex, baby. We're going to talk about you and me. We're going to have a good time.
This is my favorite topic to talk about. Yay. All right. So let's start at the beginning. So, okay, how did you two ladies meet and why did you start this journey of intimacy and self-discovery and the podcast?
Go for it.
Well, so Leah and I met. Leah was one of my Tantra teachers. She was one of my primary Tantra teachers. And I had been teaching Taoist sexuality already for probably about a decade or more. And then I started diving into Tantra a little bit, which is very, very similar, but there are some subtle differences, which we'll talk about a little later on. But I had done some telesummits, and I had interviewed Charles Muir, who is sort of the pioneer of Tantra here in the Western world. He's been teaching for like 40 or something years, like that.
Wow.
And Leah has been his co-teacher, among many other things. They were engaged at one point. They were in a relationship for quite some time. And so they taught, you guys have been teaching together for 20 years, probably?
20 plus years now. Yeah, I think we're on our 22nd year.
Yeah.
Wow.
So Charles
both married to different people now.
yeah.
So we're happily
really
ever after,
friends.
even after.
That's perfect. Totally different life.
Yeah, one of the things in Tantra, like friendship is the most important relationship, of any relationship. So they've really done a good job of keeping that. And so, so Charles was like, hey, why don't you come to my beginner's weekend? I'll give you a discount since you're in the industry. And took me a long time. It took me like a year and a half to actually take him up on that. I had I had to dig through emails and find it. And I was like, okay, I'm ready to come to this because I had to drag my partner along with me, right? And
were you you were nervous or you were just like
ready
for it?
You were
ready. She was ready.
Yeah, it was the partner.
He wasn't so sure.
Not so much.
Which is very common with couples. There's always somebody who's like, I don't know if I want to do this. So
yes.
And the trajectory of that is usually the person who's being dragged to the class is the one that gets the most out of it. So you just get them there.
Yeah.
There.
I don't know if that's entirely true in this instance, though, because in the end, I got Leah out of it. So.
There's that.
That's a good outcome.
So there I was sitting in the class, and I was like, wow, this is great. I felt like Charles and Leah were like kind of a combo of the way that I teach. Like he sort of channels stuff, and she's got all the information and all the anecdotes, and also channels, and like really knows how to just is very eloquent. And I was just like, she's an amazing teacher. I was like, I would love to teach next to her one day. That was just like a thought and a feeling that I had. I was like, God, we would have great synergy if we taught together ever. Yeah. And then, the years went by. I think it was 3 or 4 years before we actually started teaching together and doing our podcast and all of that. Yeah, but it all worked out in the end. Here we are.
Wow.
Yeah. And she was her and her partner were the darling of that class. I mean, it was so fun. The couples come back after they do some homework on Saturday night, and they just had the most heartfelt story. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. So there's something like they really stood out.
Yeah.
And Willow's just so lovely, and she's such She has this academic spirit that's
Hmm.
also like the foundation is very spiritual. So to see sort of how Taoism and Tantra complement each other, it was
Yeah.
really just a synergy that made so much sense.
Oh, I
And to
love
give your
that.
audience just a sort of a framework as to like how, well,
Yeah.
how is Tantra and Taoism different?
Hmm.
Well, Tantra it originated from the Indus Valley, which is now known as India, matriarchal society, pre-Hindu,
Hmm.
sort of form of taking a look at, we have this thing called yoga, and most of yoga preaches brahmacharya, which means celibacy. And the Tantrika said, you know what, this energy that everyone's trying to conserve and save because it's so precious, because that sexual energy will get you ahead in the God game if you don't squander it. Well, the
Oh.
Tantrika said, no, it's not about squandering, it's about harnessing. So they were the yogis, they were the householders, they were the ones that were making love and having children and being a part of the community. So they wanted the same spiritual evolution. So they learned
Mm.
how to harness the sexual energy and therefore, raise their experience of the divine through the art of love. Now, Taoism is originates from China. And what's interesting how Tantra takes that same sexual energy and uses it to kind of go further in the quest for enlightenment and
Okay.
also into the realms of pleasure and profundity and transcendence, right? It's like taking
Mm.
sex and making it very transcendent and having these epic oneness experiences. Taoism has a very similar approach. What's unique about it is it takes that same sexual energy and uses it to apply it to the body in such a way that you're increasing your health, your regenerative abilities, your longevity. So it's
Mm.
all about vitality. It's taking that orgasmic energy instead of necessarily giving it up to God, it's giving it to your
Yeah.
kidneys, it's giving it to your adrenals, it's giving it to all your organs in your
It's
skin
paying
so that you
back.
are keeping your body well.
Yeah.
And this can fight off disease. So it's a part of taking a look at sex as medicine, not simply this place where we get relief. So
Yeah.
where Taoism and Tantra really come together in harmony, it's taking a look at sexual energy, not from this biological urge that every
Hmm.
animal figures out. How can I get
Hmm.
off? How can I get
Hmm.
relief? How can I have babies?
Hmm.
But instead takes a look at it from a place of like, how can this be a part of our wellness? How can this affect in a healthy way every other sector of our life so that we're more creative, so that we're healthier, so that we're more pleasured? Because life is challenging and pleasure is the
Yeah.
antidote to all the crap that we encounter.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we forget about that all the time. We just think of sex as like, I think after people have been married for so long and they feel like they're kind of in this mundane routine and it's just kind of like, oh, it's Wednesday night, time to have sex. And instead of looking at it from a different way of how it can pay back to ourselves and replenish ourselves and do things like that, we just kind of brush it off like a chore.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so many people are doing it out of
Yeah.
necessity to try to keep the relationship in good standing,
Yeah.
or because they think they should. They're not. They've lost their desire for it,
Mm,
right? And they've lost
yeah.
their, and then that loses your desire for so much in life. It's amazing.
Right.
It's incredible what happens to couples when they open up this cornucopia of what's possible, when they reimagine what sexuality even is. So many, heterosexual couples are thinking, oh, it's got to be penis vagina, and that's what it is. And if
Yeah.
that's uncomfortable for a woman, let's say she's in perimenopause, she's starting to have less plumpness in her vulva or less
I think that's
juiciness.
Or
me.
penetration
Yeah,
hurts.
it
Yeah.
Yeah.
hurts, like
Yeah.
penetration, they're not ready for it, it hurts. It's like, then if that's what sex is, then one woman usually is like,
Yeah.
I don't want it, like
Yeah.
that's not interesting to me.
Yeah.
So when we pull back the lens and really start to get more of a bird's eye view of what's possible and teach the other partner, generally usually
Hmm.
men, how to touch the vulva, how to hang out on the outside of the vulva where most of the nerve endings are anyway,
Yeah.
how to arouse the nipples, how to arouse all these amazing, incredible secondary erogenous zones on the body that can range from like the inner elbow to an actual
Mm.
meridian point, like an
Wow.
acupuncture point. There's such a vast array of what's possible when we start to reimagine sexuality as not just like this act,
Yeah.
but something to be curious about and to explore and to play with. I was just teaching a couple the other day and I was like, imagine your fingers are paintbrushes,
Yeah.
paint that oil all over and like use your whole body to conform to the other person's body.
Yeah.
There's just so much to play with and explore when we get educated, which
That's
Leah
the
and I have
key.
tons of
Yeah.
education for you on
I
that.
love that. I
Come
Yeah.
love
on
that.
over.
Yeah.
Lots to learn.
And when you remember how to play, because I
Yeah.
think, one of the things that Willow just highlighted is this is something we get to play with. And we're in such a hurry as kids to grow up and be adults and be
Mhm.
taken seriously and be able to make our own choices and, make our way in the world that we start to take life really seriously. And
Yeah.
then, we get our careers and then we start families and like we
Mhm.
really forget how to play. And it's the great adult tragedy.
Yeah.
So we have to remember that like sexuality is like our probably the easiest extension that we can step into when it comes to being playful.
Yeah.
And I think, one of the things that I always tell couples in our programs is we have to change the goal of sex.
Mhm.
Because right now we're passing or we're failing, and most of us are failing. It's like
I'd
we're
agree.
grading our
Yeah.
partner or we're grading ourselves. And if our sex life isn't great, then that spills over into every other part of our life where it feels like our whole life isn't successful. Like it becomes
Mhm.
we become very myopic on
Yeah.
what's wrong with us in our bedroom, what's wrong with our
Right.
sexuality. And so it ends up being this place that talk about being devoid of playfulness, ends up being an obligation and a chore and an anxiety, a performance anxiety, enduring something that's not bringing us like the joy that we expect for it to bring. And so we have to remember that, there's an old saying that says, God created sex, but it's been
Mhm.
men and women who've been fucking it up. So to kind of come back to like
That's
this
great.
thing, it's like when you make orgasm the goal, you
Yeah.
could be setting both you and your partner up. If you make the sex about love,
Yeah.
orgasms follow love. Orgasms will follow the energy.
Mm.
Now, that's also predisposing that we're talking about couples who want to be in love. Whereas there's lots of people who want to have sex and they don't necessarily need to be in love to do that.
Right.
But there's still ways to bring in the energy of love versus the emotion of love that still allows us to play in a playground that takes us
Mm.
to different states. And I would also just add that it's not always what we do to each other, like in
Mhm.
the ways of touch or penetration, that make for great sex. A lot of great sex comes with the things that are happening before the actual sex act. And what that means
Ooh, the
are the
foreplay.
obstacles that are happening on our way to
Mm.
sex. Because longing, for instance, is a great aphrodisiac.
Oh,
Think about
yeah.
all the times you've longed for somebody, right? It's like you can't wait to have on that date. Are they going to be as into you
Yes.
as you are to them? Is the sex still going to be hot? Do they still feel the same way that you feel? You've got all this longing, and that builds up a lot of sexual tension.
Yes.
And then you've got other obstacles like the forbidden. I heard this story once of like there was this girl she was a teenager and her parents didn't like her boyfriend, right? He was in a
Mhm.
band, total naughty boy. And she's coming home, parents are probably asleep, they're in the driveway.
Uh-huh.
The van is packed with all the music equipment. They can only be in like one seat. So they're trying to figure out how to have sex. They end up having the most epic sex because any minute the parents could open the door
Ooh,
and
it's the
find her with the
anticipation.
bad boy in
Ah,
the driveway. So you could just kind of see like there are these little
yes.
things, these obstacles that can supercharge
Yeah.
sexual tension. And I think a lot of couples could harness the potential of
Mm.
obstacles to really have more juicy sex, to really
Yeah.
increase that missing sexual energy that sometimes
Talk
just
about
arrives.
reimagining. I love
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So, and there's lots of
Absolutely.
dynamics. I could give
Yeah.
1,000 other examples that kind of help us take a look at what could we actually creatively create in the way of an obstacle that
Yeah.
we can actually lean into and use that as sexual energy and sexual tension.
And do you think a lot of it is that it's just the fear? I'm sure it is. Like people are afraid, right, to let that go, which is kind of what you guys are trying to do as your mission is to like free sex from it being shameful, right?
Yeah,
And all of that
Yeah.
stuff. And so I know for myself, I've been that way. I grew up where we didn't talk about sex in my family. My parents are older. It was never discussed. I remember not even discussing like shaving and all of that good stuff. My
yeah,
first, my first encounter with who was my ex-husband, I mean, we went to go at it, and here I've got this big bush, not even knowing. And he's like, oh my God, like laughing. But I didn't know. And we just didn't talk about it in my family. So I think that sometimes is a big thing where people are just fearful of the unknown.
And that
Yeah,
can be
that's exactly
very
it.
anti-aphrodisiac.
Yeah.
So it's what's interesting about fear and anxiety is that there's a place where it can be aphrodisiac, and it can be too much of it becomes an anti-aphrodisiac. So, but and maybe Willow can speak deeper into this, is I think that's where intimacy plays a big, big role in us being able to talk about the things that we're afraid to talk about. In order to like expose the things that we've been uncomfortable with. Do we trust a partner enough to be able to say those vulnerable things that make us closer, and that again ends up making that sexual intimacy deeper? So sometimes those really highly charged conversations that have kept us blocked or has kept us feeling insecure or simply ignorant, right? We kind of feel foolish because we don't know what we don't know, and then we find out we don't know a lot.
Totally.
And we're then embarrassed. Those are some of the early things that we have to navigate in order to have those profound experiences. And that means you got to trust your partner.
Yeah, which means you have to trust yourself, and that's what we're teaching a lot with our clients is, this is an opportunity to get closer to yourself, really, because through another partner, through the mirror of looking into another, you see yourself more intimately. And intimacy is made up of 3 pillars, which are trust, vulnerability, and presence. And when we trust ourselves, that's the primary place where we need to place that trust. When we trust ourselves, then we can trust ourselves with whomever we choose to. Hopefully our partners. Some of us choose not to, like, let's be honest about that. And then when we have that level of trust, like whatever happens on the outside, because you don't have control of your partner, you ultimately don't have control of anything outside of you. So if you know that you can come home and back to your own center and back to your own state of sovereignty and your own essence, and find your way through whatever difficult challenges you have to find your way through and rise above, if you have a sense of, I can do that, I have that resilience in me, and I can build more of it if necessary, then you're more available to be vulnerable with that other person. And then when you share vulnerably, like, hey, we've been together for 25 years and I really don't like the way you go down on me. I'm ready to say that now. Like something is awakening in me, and the way you do that is so irritating. And you might not want to say it like that, but you could say it like, hey, I love that you love to go down on me. However, what I would really like to explore, I think this would work really good for my body as it's shifting and changing at this time in my life. What I would really love to explore is like, where you're barely touching my body, you're barely touching my clitoral head, and you're making my clitoris reach for your tongue. Like almost like your tongue is a magnet, then it's like, okay, that's a vulnerable thing for a lot of women to say. And so, but then and then the guy's like, wow, that sounds hot. That sounds fun. And so,
I wish you would have told me 20 years ago.
So then he's like, wow, she just opened up vulnerably and shared something with me. I know that wasn't easy for her. Maybe I could share something vulnerable with her. And so it creates this loop between 2 people of trust and vulnerability. And that's an upward spiral. It really is, especially when you hold it in a sacred space. And then the presence that is required for true, like ecstatic, blissful, phenomenal, like galactic orgasms it just comes naturally. The presence is there because you need presence in order to trust yourself, and you need presence in order to be vulnerable with another person.
Yeah, and you need someone else to be present in order to hear all those things that you're putting out. It's like for someone to catch what you're sharing. If they're somewhere else, if they're thinking about the list, if they're fantasizing, if they're not really with you, you're going to feel like you are dropped. And so it's like when you're really present with your partner and your partner's present with you, they're ready to catch you. And I think that that's so important for us to take some of those emotional risks that Willow was just describing. And, one of the things that we need to lean into more, especially in long-term relationships, is that there's been some emotional capital that hopefully has been getting growing over decades of being together.
Right.
And in other cases, it's actually been chipped away over years as
Mm,
people drift apart.
yeah.
And so, another word for presence that people may be able to connect to is it's the same thing as being in the moment.
Hmm.
Presence is being in the moment. You're not anywhere else. You're
Yeah.
right there with the people that you're sharing that intimacy with.
Yeah. So it's about really just focusing because I deal with the same thing in my head. I'm thinking about, oh, what am I going to make for dinner
Hmm.
tonight? You're not even in the moment of it. And I think when people do what you said, Willow, about the, speaking up and saying what you need, now that's creating this new dynamic for the excitement for the next time you're going to have sex, right? It's almost like
Yeah.
starting all over again with a new
Yeah.
partner.
Yeah,
Probably
I
feels
mean,
like that.
just exactly. I mean, just starting to give feedback to your partner can
Yeah.
be and the biggest game changer for your sex life ever. Because there's this, we all kind of grow up with this expectation of the guy knows what to do and
Yeah.
we should enjoy it. That is like that's the biggest fuck up in sexuality ever,
Because
right?
rarely do they know
The
what to
guy
do.
doesn't know what to do, and
Yeah,
we
why
don't know what
would
we
they?
enjoy.
I mean, who teaches
Yeah, who
anybody?
teaches
I
them?
mean, there's no decent sex education out there by and large, so it's like
I
we're
was
all fumbling. Our parents barely know
exactly.
what to say. They're embarrassed to share anything
Exactly.
about this stuff to their kids. They get so awkward. And then,
Yes.
Yes.
we're left with our friends who are in the
Yep.
same boat as us.
Yep.
And
Yes.
or at worst, we're looking at porn, which by the
Hmm.
way are actors. It's entertainment. It's not sex education. You might get a tip or two, but most of it is a misdirection of how most
Yes.
people want to be touched and fucked. And
Hmm.
Yes.
and so that ends up just being a continuation of confusion.
Yeah. And porn can often
Absolutely.
just ruin sex in the way that men think, oh, this is just going to be like that. I'm going to go down on you for 30 seconds and you're going to be like,
Yeah.
oh, all right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like,
Or
great.
like every woman wants to be just rammed,
Yeah.
It's like this
Yeah.
like piston, it's like
And
we need
some
to talk
women
about slow
do want
sex.
that, but you got to find
Yes.
out what's true for that woman on that day of her monthly cycle because
That's
it's
Yeah.
going to be totally different
and a
depending on
different
where she's at.
and different types of arousal, right? It's like
Yes.
Absolutely.
I think
Different
every woman
moment to moment.
would want that, but
Yeah.
it
If she's
depends on how
hot.
far along on the arousal scale she's on. Like, don't
Yeah.
start with that for crying out loud. You got to build
Yes.
up to that.
Exactly. One of the great things Tantra teaches that's a very good general rule of thumb for those who
Mhm.
are getting educated right now is when you're working with a woman, start from the outside and work your way in. Like start from
Oh,
the feet and the hands and
Yeah, the
work your way up the
extremities.
arms and the legs and then don't go straight to the primary erogenous zones. Don't go straight for the
yes.
nipples. Don't go
And the
Tease
straight
a
clitoris.
for the
little.
vagina. Like
Yeah.
warm her up. In the Taoist system, we think about it like we think about sexual arousal energy as like a pot on the
Hmm.
stove, and you got to turn it on, right? You got to turn the fire on, and then let that boil up to a nice warm simmer, and then
Yeah.
keep going, and then it will start to be boiling, and eventually she'll be like, wow, overflowing with like this boiling water. And one of the
Yeah.
things that I teach the women I work with is like, make sure like keep yourself at a nice warm rolling temperature. Like when you're
Yes.
in the shower, that's a good opportunity to be like, oh, that feels good, oh, I like that. I mean, if you can move that shower head around, have a
Yeah.
good time. Give yourself permission to like find pleasure in all these strange little places that we all do every single day.
Yeah.
Washing the dishes, going outside to get the mail out of the mailbox. Could there be pleasure there? I mean, having a
Like
bell.
what? What would
Could
be
there be
pleasurable
pleasure
going to the
there?
mailbox?
Yeah, like feeling
Well,
the air
feeling
on
the
your
wind on your
Ooh.
skin.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
feeling the
we
sun
Breathing
on
really,
your
in.
skin.
Maybe you
ah,
smell some jasmine nearby. I don't know.
so we
Like
tend to
find.
just take these moments for granted, right? We don't think
Mhm.
about them in that perspective. I've
Yeah.
never thought about it. And I'm like, go and get the mail. It's just
Yeah.
like a normal everyday thing, but that's a totally different way of looking at it.
Yeah,
Hmm.
it's really
Ooh, I like
about
it.
going, okay, what makes for good sex? Sensuality leads us
Yeah.
to greater sex.
Ding,
And
ding,
Yeah.
ding.
so what would lead to a more pleasured life? All right, sensuality. Well, what's sensuality? It's the senses. It can be
Five
Hmm.
very
senses.
simple, right? It's not
Hmm.
necessarily about sexual.
Hmm.
If we can kind of stay in the mindset of a sensual mindset, then that allows us, it primes us for being in the mood
Hmm. Hmm.
for more closeness, to have
Yeah.
more sensuality, which ends up leading us into a real rapturous experience. And rapture can happen in the bedroom, but it can also happen by ourselves in nature. It can
Mm-hmm.
happen as we're cooking for somebody that we love. There's so many ways to really start to fine tune leading a pleasure-filled life.
Wow.
And women in particular, we've not been conditioned
Mm-hmm.
to think about pleasure or to think that we deserve pleasure. It's always been about being selfless,
Mm-hmm.
putting other people in front of our own needs, and that even our own needs seem not nearly as important as the family needs or our partner's needs. And so we
Yeah.
don't even think about how pleasure actually leads us to a more satisfying life. Because pleasure, in fact, has been proven to show it increases your immune system. People who live a
Mm.
pleasured life live longer. They have
Better for your
lower,
microbiome, better
better
for
for
your
your microbiome,
endocrine
better for your
system,
weight, better for
sleep,
your energy
Yes.
levels, better for
everything.
sleep. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a really increases our feeling of life satisfaction. And so it behooves us to really decondition the places where we think we're unworthy of pleasure, or
Mm.
we think that pleasure is bad, or that pleasure is somehow dangerous. And we need
Yeah.
to think about the simple things of sensuality. How
Right.
can I gain more pleasure from life? How can I actually be really present with this glass of wine? Right?
Mm-hmm.
This beautiful Sauvignon Blanc. It came from
Mm-hmm.
Australia. I'm sitting outside. The birds are singing. It's a beautiful afternoon. I'm indulging in this beautiful elixir. It's turning me on. I'm people watching. Life is beautiful.
Oh, I
Look at
love
look at
that.
where I get to live. Look at that little kid with their mom. Aren't they adorable? That precious little squirt. You just
Rather
start
Yeah.
to
than
like take it all in.
Yeah, rather
Yeah.
than like, let me get through this glass of wine as quick as I can so I
Right.
can de-stress, so
Right,
I can have the
right, right,
next
right.
glass of
Yes.
wine.
Yeah,
It's
Yes.
yeah.
the truth is you don't need as much when you
Mm-hmm.
really slow down and take the time to appreciate.
Savor,
I
yeah.
mean,
Mm-hmm.
one of the best ways to lose weight for people who are struggling with that is to slow down and chew more. Because you
Hmm.
don't
Mm.
need as much food when you
Right.
actually chew more. You get fuller faster on
Yeah.
less food. And it's the same idea, it's the same principle. Like, just slow down. That's probably one of the biggest things you can do in your sexuality is just slow down.
I
Yeah,
love
which
it.
which is a great tip for those of you who have a hard time getting into your body because you kind of
Mm-hmm.
get stuck in your head. It's like that anxiety starts to rise. It's like, okay, it's time to have sex. My partner needs to have sex. How am I going to enjoy this? I'm hungry. I've got all these things to do. The list. Oh, I got to remember to do that email. Oh my God, there's that cobweb up in the corner. Remember to get that when this is over. It's like our
Yeah.
mind starts to go a mile a minute.
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes it's hard to just relax and let go.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
And
go ahead. Well, I just want to say though, a lot of women do feel like they have to go fast and rush and get aroused because their partner is hard and
Yeah.
he's hard now. So I
yeah,
better match his hardness right now, or
Yeah.
he's gonna lose it, and then he's gonna get all butthurt, and he's gonna have a whole problem, and la la la. This is one of the best things that Tantra brings to the table is like, it's actually good if he
Yeah.
gets hard and then soft and then hard again and then soft again,
Oh,
and it's okay if he gets really hard but then he loses his erection and never gets another one in that session, because the
okay.
next session he's going to be twice as hard and twice
Oh,
as ready to go. It's a way of cultivating, actually. So if we can kind of let go of that idea of like, let's hurry up, get it up, get it in, get it off,
yeah.
then we can actually explore with more languidity.
Ooh.
yeah. Yeah, so that's a good reminder for people who sort of dread having to have sex. It's
Yeah.
like, oh, just one more thing that somebody's taking something from me.
Yeah.
And start to like be an advocate for what is it that they need so they can have a fulfilling experience. And one of the things that can really help you is if you come back to the five senses.
Mm.
So it's like, okay, I'm in my head, I'm feeling stuck, I want to get this over with.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me just see. Okay, I'm just going to put that in the other room for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let me see if I can just pay attention to the senses. What's the sensation on my skin? And then just feel your skin non-verbally. Go in and feel the skin. Feel the
Mm.
temperature in the room. Feel the caress of your partner. Feel where your partner isn't touching you. Maybe the blanket is touching you. Maybe the sheet. Maybe your hair is touching your shoulder. Like whatever the case may be, start to really track the sensation on your skin. And then
Mm.
next, what's the taste in my mouth? So now you're tuning into taste. Maybe you'll have a sip of water and you'll really sort of enjoy the feeling of that water going down your throat and filling up your mouth. Maybe your partner's in your mouth and really like taste your partner,
Taste your
like
partner.
really be present with that,
Yeah.
and then it's like, what can you hear? Is there soft
Yeah.
music playing in the room? Well, maybe soft music in the room would be really another way for you to melt into your body. But right now, maybe what you hear is like the dog sleeping on the floor in the corner. And then maybe outside you can hear the traffic. And you're just tuning into like, what are the sounds close to me? What are the sounds further away from me? Maybe your partner's breath is evocative and they're getting really deep into their breath because they're really enjoying themselves. And
Yeah.
so you start to pay attention to the five senses. What can you see? What's the color of your lover's eyes?
Yeah.
Like, can you see them dilate in their arousal? Can
What
you
Wow.
Leah, what Leah's
That's amazing.
describing, you can use as a practice too every
Yeah.
day. I call it the sensuality awakening session. And you just sit there at the beginning of the day and you spend 5 minutes. This is a great 5-minute meditation. And you just set your timer 1 minute for each sense. Do your eyes last.
Yeah.
But start with sound, then go to smell, go to taste, go to touch. And you can do this with your partner. Just sit there, spend 5 minutes before you even touch each other.
Yeah.
Just sit there together and awaken each one of your senses for a 60-second interval of each sense. And then just see what changes in your lovemaking together.
Wow.
And sometimes you don't like your partner's breath and the way they feel on your skin isn't really working for you. So,
Yeah.
in those moments, you get the opportunity to find, well, what is working? Because we all have lots of areas in our lives where it's like, fuck, this is hard, or this isn't working, or this is a challenge. But what is working? When we place our attention and our energy and our focus on what is good and what is working and what we are grateful for, that's why gratitude practices are so powerful to create more of what you're grateful for in your life. It's profound, really, what you can do with your attention, with your focus.
Yeah. And we all have a negativity bias, so it's very instinctual. It's like we're hardwired to look for the negative.
That's right.
And that nothing will
Literally.
demoralize your partner more than just hearing about all the things you don't like.
Right.
And that's a big habit that we go into. It's like we're not putting our attention on what's working. We're putting attention on, I don't like the way you touch, and I don't like your breath, and I wish you wouldn't breathe so hard, and what. And it's like, how can we grow from there?
Right.
Human beings, scientifically, it shows that we will thrive more with positive affirmation than with criticism. So for every one piece of criticism you want to offer, you have to come up with 4 positive things to balance that one critical thing. Wow. So if we can sort of suspend judgment, I don't like the way they're touching me, and go, okay, isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Okay, let me get curious about this. What if I just grabbed their hand gently and just said, oh, just be still right here. I want to feel the heat from your palm.
Mm.
And it's just being present with that. So it's like, suspend your criticism, suspend your initial reaction, and get zoom out. Find what they're doing right. Baby, you smell so good right now. I love that cologne.
Wow.
And so you have to train yourself to get really fast. You have a critical thought. What's going right? They're here with me. They're
I love
spending this
that.
time with me. They're investing this time with me.
Yeah.
They want me. They desire me. They
And
crave.
that's what everybody wants.
Yeah.
So
So it's
such an
like,
amazing feeling.
what a gift you can give yourself when you can do your own pattern interrupt. And that doesn't mean endure something that's unpleasant, but there's a way with which you can, through partnership, come at these difficult things together, and how you communicate makes the big difference on the breakthroughs that are possible. And lastly, just to kind of finish up that piece on the senses, is what I love about that exercise of paying attention to your 5 senses and tracking it is it immediately brings you into your body. It will immediately bring you into presence, which is what's so hard. Everyone's like, well, how do you get present? It's like, well, just pay attention what's happening right now to the senses, and boom, you're there. It doesn't have to be complicated.
Yeah.
What about, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, what about introducing blindfolds or,
Yeah.
Sensory
sometimes you
deprivation.
use, like
Super
certain things
powerful.
of like food, maybe some chocolate sauce dripped on your body and they have to find it with their tongue,
Or
things
warm
like that.
coconut oil.
Yes.
So good.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
One of the things about this, like the senses being a doorway or a portal to the present moment, to presence, is is you're actually receiving in that moment. And this is receptivity is probably the feminine's greatest superpower. And we all have feminine energy and masculine energy, no matter what gender we claim.
Mm-hmm.
And so this receptivity is super under practiced in our culture. We're all like going out and getting and giving and doing and da 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 da, but we don't just kick back and receive very often.
Yes.
We don't receive compliments well. We don't receive,
Mm-hmm.
being held or supported very well generally. There's a lot of room for us all to practice receptivity. So when you're
Yeah.
going out to get your mail and you're receiving the feeling of the air on your skin and you're receiving, the abundance that you even have a mailbox. I actually don't have one right now. It's like you're receiving, you're opening up to the present moment. You can't receive what's coming tomorrow. You can't receive what came yesterday. It's
Yeah.
only happening in this moment.
Wow. I'm like blown away because I'm just taking it all in because I know that that is me. So I'm learning as we go here as well. And you talked a lot about how this, all the sexual energy helps you to maintain like a healthier lifestyle. And I was just curious about, a lot of my audience is in perimenopause or going into menopause, myself included, how has that changed with what we're going through now? How
Yeah,
is that
so that
different?
That's really is such a good question. And really, one of my main specialties is like women who are approaching peri or
Mm-hmm.
getting into it. I have a whole program. I have a whole journey for women who are
Oh,
like, I really want to learn how to be in my feminine at this point in my life
yeah.
and become better at receiving and become better at having boundaries because
Yes.
you've gone through life all this time in sort of one track and one way, and you've patterned, you've done the
Mm.
same thing over and over again. And when you start to approach perimenopause, it's like, fuck, things are changing.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
changing.
Yeah. Who
Like
am
things are
I?
not what, like, I can't do it that way anymore. I don't have the
Yeah.
capacity to do it that way anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a whole way of following your moon cycle, following your monthly menstrual cycle. That's
Mm-hmm.
your internal moon cycle. But then once we go all the way through menopause, we still have a moon cycle. It's just
Ah,
up in the sky. And so when we start to align our lives to the moon and to our menstrual moon cycles, it's a complete game changer about how we even go out to get the mail that day, or
uh,
how we even do the dishes that day, or how we make love that, morning or night, because we are more aware that we're in a different season. This week of this month, I'm
mm-hmm.
in my spring season, so let's get it on. This week of the month, I'm in my winter season. So
Mm.
let's just cuddle and hold each other and eye
Restore.
gaze and restore and
Yeah.
breathe into each other's kidneys.
Yeah.
Like let's really build up our adrenal reserves because
Yeah.
that's the season of this monthly cycle that I'm in. So there's really a whole
Yeah.
map inside of
Okay.
each and every woman that nobody's tapped into.
Oh, I love
Yeah.
that.
What I love about Willow's ancient wisdom approach is that she's really helping women curate from the inside,
Mm-hmm.
cultivating her own feminine wisdom so that she's resourcing and aligning herself to what are my energy levels at every given day through this monthly cycle. Where do I leverage and harness
Mm-hmm.
my path forward that helps me leverage my energy capacity, my
Yeah.
creative capacity, my stillness capacity,
Mm.
my meditative capacity? How does this all come about? And let me look at it not from this linear masculine western point of view. Let me
Mm-hmm.
investigate this from a feminine eastern spiritual sacred point of view. What if I
Mm.
treated myself as being that valuable, that I set down the conditions that were handed to me, and I consider that there's a whole nother set of conditions that I can orient myself to that
Right.
actually honor this wisdom that is can be resourced from inside. I mean, we've got this connection to what I call the everything.
Mm-hmm.
And we're always looking outside of ourselves for the affirmation, for the validation, for the help or the advice that we think is out there. And what
Mm-hmm.
she really helps you cultivate is that everything you need, you have. You've just been looking in the wrong place. And this is a
Oh,
chance to come towards me and go inside and find that portal to the everything and resource from the inside my own inner guidance, because you
Yeah.
actually know the steps you need to make. And what I think is precious about perimenopause and menopause is that it finally gives women, it validates the fact that we get to have a pause. Excuse me,
Yeah.
my body just ain't gonna do what you think you want it to do.
Right.
And it's my turn to take a pause and have a reflective moment, a journey of reflection to go look at all that I've done.
Yeah.
Look at who I am. Look at what I've experienced. Look at the crises and the obstacles I've encountered and overcome. Look at how far I am. Look at the
Mm.
precious moments I've experienced. Now, what do I want the next 30 years to be?
Yeah.
Who do I get to be now?
Yeah.
And where am I
Oh,
headed? And just to
that's
take a
powerful.
moment to give yourself the gift of like, I'm
Yeah.
unplugging from everyone else's agenda. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
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 And that's kind of just what happens naturally. It just starts to, you're not going to do it that way anymore. Your body just won't let you.
Yeah.
And your mind and your heart, you feel like you're going to burst if you keep going in that old pattern, in that old way. And it's such an opportunity to, like, what if we reimagined perimenopause as an opportunity to have more pleasure, more sexual freedom, more fun, instead of like this thing that you have to get through.
Right.
Like,
Yes.
what if we reframe it and we actually look at it as a potential opportunity to transform at such a deep, intimate level with ourselves that we get to know places in ourselves that we've been pushing down in the basement. They've been dormant for so long. Let's bring them up and let's bring them to the surface and start to have more fun with that.
Yeah,
That's
and it's
awesome.
a kind of devastating how many women I encounter who, as they're going through perimenopause and then menopause, just go, meh, it's not for me anymore.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in sex. It's like I'm actually glad that part of my life is done. And that's okay. If that's your path, that's your path. No judgment. No judgment at all, actually. But when I see women who challenge that instinct that goes, no, I don't have to stop being juicy just because my body is transforming into another stage for my life. There's another path. There's lots of different adventures I can go down, but what are they? You got to go find out, because if you don't use it, sister, you will lose it. And that is just the damn truth. And so, and it's okay if you choose to make that pause the rest of your life. Pause stages are actually really important. Resting stages.
Yeah, that's
it's okay
the
for us to be
winter
celibate.
phase. It's
for
built into your
times.
monthly cycle, actually. Yeah.
But I know so many women who challenge the status quo, and they're having better orgasms than they ever had in their 20s and their 30s.
Wow.
And so that's who I'm going to use as a role model. And Willow and I we have a direct line to perimenopause. It's going to be, that's going to be our path in a couple of years. So we're in the same boat.
Yeah, and it's best, ladies who are listening, it is best to get ahead of it. Like, there's herbs to get on, there's diet to change, there's practices, sexual practices to do that align with your moon cycle. Especially if you're still having a menstrual cycle and you're like, wow, perimenopause is about 4 or 5 years off. This is the best time to start these practices and to start to pay attention and really own your body in a new way, so that when you go through the actual shift of perimenopause, you've got the training wheels already on your body and you're ready to go.
And we've got a number of episodes where we focus on menopause at the Sexual Magic Podcast. Go check that out. There's some episodes with Willow, and then we've got an episode with Dr. Liz and Dr. David. So
I love that.
Check out the lineup if this is an important topic right now for you in your life.
Yeah. I think it probably is for a lot of the listeners, because we're all in that middle age, kind of entering into that phase. And I think it's scary for a lot of us. And then, like you said, some of us are like, oh, I'm on the Alps now. I'm on the downhill, and I don't really, want to do any of that stuff anymore. But then you have some of the women who are like, oh my God, I love this period of my life. This has been the best time of my life. That's where I want to be. Oh, that part, Yeah. What were some of the herbs, Willow, that you can tell us? You just mentioned a few of the herbs. Can you give us a couple?
Yeah, just offhand, I think any woman over 40 should be on ashwagandha and chaste tree. Chaste tree is like the
chaste tree.
Vitex is the other name for chaste tree, but that is basically the queen. Think about it like this: you got to have the king and the queen in your body, and the queen herb for your ovaries is Vitex. or chaste tree.
Okay.
And the king herb for your adrenal glands is ashwagandha. So
Ah,
one of the reasons women are having such a hard time and taking so long to get through perimenopause, really perimenopause, if we were doing life really super healthy and right, it
yeah.
would take 2 years, a year
Oh,
to
wow.
2 years. And now it's taking what, 5 to 10 years for women? And it's because of our environment. We're just
Mhm.
riddled with xenoestrogens. It's
Mhm.
because of the foods we're eating. It's because we're sugar, caffeine, those are big
Yep.
ones.
I was
It's
just
because
thinking I could have a cup of tea again.
yeah, I mean, everyone's making
Yeah,
their own
right. It's
choices,
like
right? Yeah. And it's also because of the thoughts that we're having. Because when you go into perimenopause, basically your ovaries have been making the majority of your sex hormones your whole menstrual
Mm.
years, your cycling fertility years. And now all of a sudden your ovaries are winding down, they're waning, just like the
Mm.
moon wanes. They're starting to
Mhm.
wane, and then they take their final bow and they exit stage left, right? And then the ovaries, I mean, not the ovaries, the adrenals then step up to
Uh-huh.
front center stage. And
Okay.
if the adrenals are stepping up to kind of replace, not fully, but they do then make all the sex hormones, the adrenals do. And if they're getting up to center stage and they're like, all right, we're ready to go, we're feeling good, we've been preparing for this, we've been doing our kidney breathing exercise, our orgasmic upward draw
Yeah, our
exercises,
Kegels.
we've been taking all the herbs and eating right, then you're gonna have a much easier perimenopause. But if those
Yeah.
adrenal glands are stepping up to the front center stage and they're like, oh, I guess I'll stand up here. I'm kind of tired though. I would
Yeah,
rather go take
I'm
a
so
nap.
drained.
It's like
Yeah,
we
so
want
good.
most people's adrenals are like shriveled up little raisins. And
Yeah.
we, with the sexual practices that the Tao teaches, they get juiced up and big and plump and juicy, like big juicy plums. So
Wow.
we want to shift those adrenals ASAP, like the
Yeah.
sooner the better.
Wow. Now, I know you talked a little bit about the difference between Taoist and Tantra. Can you give, just so that we get a better understanding, because it's so much information, and trying to understand it, like just little examples of the difference between the two? Are you able to do that? Just so
Sure,
we get a
yeah.
better understanding.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I just mentioned the kidney breathing and the
Hmm.
orgasmic upward draw. The orgasmic upward draw tantra plays with as well, but I would say like specifically drawing orgasmic arousal energy to your kidneys, where your adrenal
Okay.
glands live, right on top of them, is very, very Taoist, right?
Okay.
And then there's also like you can use that orgasmic upward draw to bring arousal energy up to your thyroid. If you have a
Mm.
thyroid issue, that's a huge part of your endocrine system. You can bring it up to your thymus if you're feeling like your immune system is low. You can bring arousal energy using the orgasmic upper draw into your pineal gland and your pituitary and your hypothalamus, all these major glands in your body that relate to your hormones.
Mm.
And so when you're bringing that like higher frequency, like, oh my God, this feels so
I feel so
fucking good,
Yes.
when you're
Yeah.
bringing that higher frequency into different glands in your body, you're actually
Yeah.
really healing your body at the core level, at the
Mm.
deepest level. And tantra is a little bit, I feel like for me, I think of tantra as like just a little bit more, not so specific. It's just
Okay.
like a little bit more open, a little bit more
Yeah.
free loving, like, okay,
Yeah.
yeah, let's bring it to the heart. That feels good. We're not so focused on glands, but more focused on like the love and the connection and all of that. Like
Yeah.
sometimes I'll do a Taoist sexual practice, with somebody that maybe I'm working with a client. And for me, they're just a client and they're having a whole experience.
Hmm.
And I'm like, okay, well, they're high on their own sexual energy. Let me draw some of that chi up into my own adrenal glands and fill
Yeah.
up my bank account of sexual energy based
Wow.
on what I'm in the field of right now, right?
Yes.
And it's not like I'm taking on their energy or like anything like that. It's like
Yeah.
this field is holding this energy. It's the same thing when you go out in nature and you're
Yeah.
like, oh my God, this tree, or behold, this sunset, or oh my God, the glory of the sky right now. You can pull chi from the field, from nature, from people you're intimate with,
From
from people,
beauty.
from yourself.
Mm.
and pull it into different glands, different organ systems. A lot of
Yeah.
women don't understand that the liver is one of the biggest parts of your endocrine system because it's not a gland, but it's
Yeah.
an organ and it plays a huge role in your thyroid. And so we really need to cleanse the liver every year. It's very important. So
Oh,
there's just,
wow.
a
Yeah,
lot.
so you can see like Taoism has this really beautiful, it takes nature and
Mm-hmm.
it utilizes energy and it helps you cultivate focus so that you can regenerate your body. There
Oh.
is a very methodical and intricate way of being in your body by playing with these energies and the power of nature and combining them.
Mm.
So you have to be open-minded enough
Yeah.
to believe in energy and that it can have a great positive effect on you. You have to
Mm-hmm.
be open-minded enough to be able to harness that energy, even though you can't see it. Can you
Mm-hmm.
fine-tune your attention so that you can feel it? And that's
Mm.
the thing that takes the learning curve. Sometimes we can't feel energy until we start to put our attention on it. And with
Yeah.
practice, you start to go, oh, I think I got it. I think I can feel it. And for those people who can visualize,
Yeah.
that's going to make that process a little bit faster, a little bit easier. I
Mm.
would I would add that Tantra, I always think of Tantra as like it's the beautifier of sex. It's what brings beauty to sex. It's
Uh-huh.
what brings poetry to sex. It's what brings the sacred to sex. So it's like this, and both from a solo practice, which is what we call white Tantra, and that's
Mm-hmm.
where you would do your yoga practice and you would work with your own cultivating, having your heart open and working on trusting yourself and
Mm-hmm.
touching your body and discovering what turns you on
Yeah.
and being able to like treat this whole experience as a prayer. You're not just praying, your body is an act of prayer, and how
Yeah.
you move in the world can symbolize that. And so when you play with the red tantra, which is like playing music with the band, your white
Okay.
tantra is you're practicing your music, you're
Okay.
practicing, you're using your instrument. And
Uh-huh.
then when you come to play with the band is red tantra. That's when you and another partner or partners come together to
Okay.
make the music. And so that's where you think of like, okay, my body is this instrument for prayer. It's
Yeah.
we're going to come together and we're going to let our love making go out to our dreams, go
Mm.
out to the things that we want to create in our world. This is creative life force energy. That which could create life itself can be harnessed and directed anywhere we want it. So if we want to be more creative at work, well, let's learn how to self pleasure in a way that really
Mm.
uplifts you. It's not just about releasing tension, it's about fortifying creativity. Let me breathe that creativity that's pulsing in my clitoris right now and send it up to my heart so I can be more open hearted. Let me bring
Yeah.
it up to my brain so that I'm more creative. Let me bring it up to my throat so that I speak the truth and I have the courage to do so.
Mm.
So we're really taking a look at how do we harness sexual energy and use it to emotionally heal because there's
Mm.
not one of us who hasn't been wounded on the path to love.
Yeah.
And the thing that's really unique about Tantra, especially my particular niche in Tantra, is the power of sexual healing.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's 1 out of 3 women who've been sexually
Molested or
traumatized or
abused.
molested or said
Yeah.
some sort of traumatic abuse in the world of
Mm-hmm.
their sex life, and 1 out of 4 boys. And so when you think about that, how do we overcome things that so affect our sense of worthiness,
Yeah.
our feelings of shame, how we feel about our body, how we feel about our beauty, how we feel about who we attract into our life? It's such a worthy pursuit to investigate, how can I improve
Mm-hmm.
my sense of self-worth? How can I really believe and cultivate something like self-trust where I'm willing to make risks and take risks because I
Yeah.
trust I'm going to be okay even if I make a mistake.
Hmm.
And so it's all those things. When we go through a divorce, when we go through bankruptcy, when we
Yeah.
go through the loss of a child or our parents getting cancer, it really behooves us to have a place to restore our weary soul. And life gives us a lot of reasons to get weary. And so this is a way of looking at sex differently and
Wow.
spiritualizing it so that you have a place to come home to and to do the work that we can all do so we have the best life, because who doesn't want a great life? And we
Yes.
shouldn't ignore our sex life. It
Yeah.
shouldn't be the one thing that we leave at the bottom of the list as if it's not important. It's vitally important. And when you can increase how much pleasure you ingest a day,
Yeah.
sister, man, life looks more beautiful.
Possibilities are
Yeah.
endless.
Yeah.
Wow. So
And
if you,
and and if I could just say one more
yeah, of
thing, this
course,
last piece,
please.
and it helps us also process negative emotions.
Mm.
So one of the things I think is so fascinating is when we learn how to touch ourselves with consciousness, we're
Mm-hmm.
able to see where we're blocked. We can feel the blocks because the blocks will give us sensations like numbness
Okay.
or a burning feeling or an
Mhm.
owie or a bruise or like a you know, we start to find our yucks.
Yeah.
And then we also have information about our yums. So when we get really conscious about our sensations, then we can
Mhm.
start to deal with the yucks in a more
Mm.
proactive way. And what that has to do is with we harness breath and sound. So that same meditative breath that Willow was talking about, we can go, ooh, icky. I don't know that I like that feeling. Okay, let me just be with it for a minute. It's
Yeah.
my feeling. It's
Yeah.
mine. It's my
I
body saying
Yeah.
yuck. You know,
Yeah.
like, shouldn't I get curious about that?
Yeah.
If I had a yucky stomach, I'd go to the doctor. You know, so if I got a yucky feeling in my yoni, as we like to call it, then
Yeah.
we should get curious about that.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you would learn to do if you were to study tantra is to feel the sensation, not go away from it, but be with it for 3 seconds.
Mm.
Breathe into it. Pull that sensation up and give it a voice, because sound has pitch and frequency, and that's how you move the blocks out of the body. So it's
Mm.
like, oh, let me get, I don't
Vibration.
want that yuck in
Yes.
there, you
Yeah.
know? And so you
Get
learn
rid
how
of
to get
it.
more
Yeah.
and more comfortable with breathing and sounding. And so when you can feel the blocks and you move them through sound up and out of the body, then there's
Mhm.
more space for something like love to come in.
Mm.
And
And so,
pleasure.
and pleasure. And so there's two things that
Yes.
happen. You get really good at processing the yucks in life.
Yeah.
You move through them, you stop making drama out of it
Yeah.
because you know how to process it in real time. And then also that pleasure that you can feel, you learn that the same technique of breathing and sounding will amplify your pleasure. So it has a
Uh-huh.
ballooning effect. And that's how you can train your body to be multi-orgasmic and to have full body orgasms. So it's a whole science